Hello and welcome. This is our discussion about Chapter 10, which is dealing with incentive pay. As we have done with previous chapters, I'd like you to take out your textbook, and I'm going to hit some of the high points from Chapter 10 and incentive pay. And again, dealing with Chapter 10, it's all about compensation and incentive pay. In the previous chapters, we talked about pay based on other variables like your base pay, your net pay, and those sorts of things. Chapter 10 really deals with getting paid based on some sort of incentive or getting an additional amount because of some sort of special incentive or reward or bonus that you maybe have picked up. And so again, if you look in Chapter 10, we're going to talk about a couple of items there. I have my book here as well, and I'll be looking over and looking at a couple of things. So the first thing that's talked about with Chapter 10 is dealing with something called variable pay. And essentially what variable pay is the type of pay that some measure of a group or an individual receives based on some particular item. So I may get paid if I am a salesperson, it get paid a certain amount, and it varies depending on how many sales I make. A lot of you are probably familiar with this because you worked in jobs and industries where pay is variable depending on your performance. So that's talked about in on page 454. And if you look on 455 at the top, there are some different types of incentive plans. And it's in a nice little chart, and as a hint, I would certainly pay attention and read and understand some of those items because you're probably going to see them again in a few weeks on your next test. Now, continuing on with our discussions, on page 456 talks about the requirements of a successful incentive plan. And then in addition, you also talk about setting performance measures and administering incentive plans. And one thing that I would really like to point out is when you create these types of incentive plans, you have to be extremely careful in how you structure and design them. If you do them in a certain way, you can get yourselves into a lot of trouble and raise all sorts of legal and ethical issues and questions. And so you want to make sure that however you have it structured, that it's the employees understand it completely and that is very easy to understand, but also has some rules and guidelines to help clarify should there be any questions. So it's real important that you have those kinds of items set up, because if you don't, you can get into a lot of trouble. Now on page 459, there's a little bit of discussion there about individual incentive plans. So there's a group, there's team incentive plans, but there's also individual plans. And what happens with individual plans is this is what's available for me. This is what's available for me based on my performance. And then in a moment we'll talk a little bit about what's available to groups. But beginning on page 459, the discussion takes place regarding individual incentive plans. And one of the first kinds of incentive plans is called piecework. And essentially what piecework is, the employees receive a certain rate for each unit produced. So you make 500 of these, you get a certain amount. You make more than 500, maybe you get an additional amount. And that's called piecework. And then you have other ones beginning on page 460 and 461 that talk about items like standard hour pay, bonuses, merit pay. And again, you all have probably dealt with or have understood some of these or been exposed to some of these different types of pay structures and incentives. You know, occasionally you may get a bonus for Christmas or for holidays, or maybe because the company is extremely successful, you get a particular bonus. So that's what pages 460 and 461 talk about. And then there's some additional types of incentives on page 462 and so on. Lump sum merit pay, incentive awards and recognition. And then One of the more obvious ones, or the ones that's used pretty frequently, is sales incentives, and this is essentially getting a particular type or amount based on how much an individual sells. So the more you sell, the more incentive, the larger the incentive amount that you get. And then there's some additional items dealing with incentives for professional employees, or these are salaried employees, and they typically are a little different than those that are hourly waged. And you'll get stuff like executive base pay, you'll get incentives like stock options, and maybe long-term incentives that will pay off or pay a dividend after a certain amount of time. And you can really, as an executive, make a significant amount of money, not in your base pay, but in the incentives that slowly add up and over time become quite high. So that's talked about on 486, 87, 88, 89. And then beginning on page 471, it talks about group incentive plans. And these are, as defined on page 471 on the side, a compensation plan in which all team members receive an incentive bonus payment when production or service standards are met or exceeded. So as a group, once you meet those standards or those particular quotas, then as a group you all receive the incentive or the bonus. And that's what page 471 and so on talks about. Those are probably less common than the individual incentive plans. I know in my past work environment, I've never been part of a team where we received an incentive monetarily. Now, we might receive an incentive as far as recognition, but not anything monetarily. But you may have been part of a team in the past where you've received some sort of team incentive. And then the remaining part of the chapter, beginning on page 476, talks about enterprise incentive plans. And one of the big ones here is profit sharing plans. Essentially means when the company's successful, you're successful, you get a little bit of extra back. So the idea being that if you help make the company successful, then you get a little extra money in your pocket. So you're like, you know what, I will help and make sure that the company is successful. And then the other one is employee stock options. A lot of companies that are publicly traded offer their employees an opportunity to buy their stocks, and that's what employee stock options are. And there are some nice perks and advantages of that, especially if you got in at the beginning of a major corporation like Walmart or Apple. You can have some pretty good stock options there. Okay, well that is essentially Chapter 10 in a nutshell. Again, dealing with incentives and various compensation beyond the typical base pay and the net pay. But these are incentives that sort of help the employee or motivate the employees to do better, to produce more, to exceed sales quotas, and so on. As usual, if you have any questions or need any assistance, please feel free to email me at westmand@grayson.edu, or you can always post to the discussion board and ask a question there. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.